All right, welcome back, everybody. I am so incredibly excited because we are back in the Swiftful Thinking Advanced Learning playlist. I have not added to this playlist since I originally created it like 1 to 2 years ago, and I'm so excited because honestly, making the advanced videos is so fun because we just really get into some crazy code. And it's going to get really, really intricate. I think we're going to do a lot of stuff that really hits home in building amazing SwiftUI apps. So I'm super excited. I hope you guys can tell from my voice. This stuff's going to be hard, don't get me wrong, but it's really, really cool. We're really diving into the Swift language here. But before I get into all of that, I'm going to show you guys this quick video. We're going to learn in this video how to use the timeline view. I will explain it as we go, but for right now, let's just create a new file. Let's right-click the navigator, create a new file. It'll be a SwiftUI view, and you already guessed it. We're going to call it the timeline view bootcamp. Let's click create, and I'm just going to drag it down here underneath my CloudKit bootcamps. And let's get coding. And for anybody wondering, I am using Xcode 15 right now, which is why you see this hashtag preview macro that's coming in. If you're using an older version of Xcode, it will still work. All of the code inside our structs will be the exact same. The preview code has just changed a little bit. It's going to look like this once you're using Xcode 15. I will do a video in the future that explains macros and why we're moving to this direction. But for right now, there's no actual difference whether you're using the new preview or the old preview. So I would just ignore that if you're in an old version of Xcode. But anyway, let's just jump right into this. We're going to look at the timeline view in this video. The timeline view is a great way for creating pixel perfect animations in SwiftUI. So I'll explain exactly why we need this in a second, but let's start with a simple example. I'm going to create here a VStack, and then in the VStack, let's create a timeline view. A timeline view has a schedule and context. So for the schedule, we're just going to keep it simple with just .animation for now. We're going to use this custom one in a second. And then for content, I'm just going to click enter, and this will be our timeline view default context. I will just call it context. And then we're going to be working inside this closure, basically the rest of this video. Now, when I do this, I think we're going to get an error message here because animation, this timeline view is only for iOS 15. So I'm just going to jump into my navigator and make this iOS 15 only, at least for now. And before we actually write some code, let's just put something on the screen. So I'm going to put a text here that says hello. All right, looks like that's building. And inside this context, we actually get back a date. So I'm going to put on the screen here the context.date. All right. And so the whole purpose of this timeline view is basically that we can create really, really intricate animations because this closure is going to execute rapidly at a very high frequency. And then we can animate based on the context in this closure. So even if I look at like this .animation, we can see here pausable schedule of updates, updating at a frequency no more quickly than the provided interval. So we're not giving it an interval right now, but if we look at the date, we can see it's updating at least once every second because every second this is updating. I think this text, the lowest denominator is just by seconds. But if I look at the date dot, maybe if I do time interval since 1970, we can see that this date is actually executing literally every like millisecond or less than that, right? So the reason I'm showing you this is because this text right now is getting updated every single time that time interval changes. So look how many numbers are changing here. So this closure is literally executing at an incredibly high frequency. And so that's kind of the whole purpose of this timeline view is that this closure is going to continually execute. And based on the timing of that closure, we can perform really cool animations or like really custom animation. So why is that needed in SwiftUI? Well, because if we were going to do just a regular animation in SwiftUI, we would probably have to create some sort of at state private var, like maybe animate of type bool equals false. We've done this 100 times on my channel. And then you would do some animation, you would set animate to true, you would animate, and then if you want to maybe go backwards, you would set animate back to false. And then the tricky part though is that if your animation has like 2 or 3 parts to it, you would end up needing to add a bunch of these. You'd say like animate part 1 and then animate maybe part 2, and then you'd have animate 3. And this is decent for a simple animation if you're just like doing maybe 1 or 2 things. But if you're getting really intricate in your animations, this is not scalable and it's really difficult to work with. So instead, we can build out these timeline views and then basically just animate based on the date or the time inside this closure. So for example, if I wanted to animate a square, like after 1 second, and then after 3 seconds, and then after 10 seconds, and then after 20 seconds, I could do all that much more easily because this closure is already triggering at a very high frequency. And we can just say, hey, if it's been 10 seconds, change the animation to this. So that's basically what we're going to do for the rest of this video. I'm just going to do some really simple examples to show you guys how to actually use this, but you guys can then go on your own and build some actual really cool animations. All right, so for starters, of course, we did this time interval since 1970, but I'm just going to revert it back to the actual context.date so we can see that the current time, 9:19, 50 seconds. So for example, let's put on the screen here a rectangle, and let's give this rectangle a frame. I'm going to keep the height at 100. We're not going to animate the alignment, and let's animate maybe the width of the rectangle. And so as a simple example, let's base the animation on the seconds in this date. So here I'm going to say let seconds equals, let's call the calendar.current. And let's get the component.seconds from the context.date. Just to show you what that is, I'm going to put that on the screen as well. Let's just put these seconds on it in a text. So 39, 40. And then maybe we want to animate the width of this rectangle based on the current seconds of the current time. So maybe we want to animate it like, let's say seconds. If seconds is less than maybe 10, let's keep the width at 50. Otherwise, if seconds is less than maybe 30, put the width at 200, and then otherwise the default will be the width at maybe 400. All right, so we can see here seconds is less than 10 right now, so we're at 50. And then when it gets to 10, it should bump up to 200. And just like that. And we saw that it didn't animate, so we're probably going to want to add some dot animation here of dot, maybe let's do ease in out, or maybe spring. I think spring is cool. Or maybe I think there's some new animations actually in Xcode 15, maybe bouncy. And let's animate on change of seconds. All right, so I see here the time right now is 51 seconds. But once we switch back to cross to 60 and go back to 0, I think it should animate back down to 50. Awesome. That actually animation looks really cool. I really like this new bouncy animation that's coming in Xcode 15. When we get past 10, I think we're going to animate. Awesome. So you can see here how we could like really start to customize this animation because it's literally based on every single second. So we can do some really intricate, like this is a super simple ternary operator thing, but we can get some really intricate animations going that are pixel perfect to the second or even to the millisecond. Now, before we move forward, there's a couple things that I want to talk about here. Firstly, as I showed you guys before, if we look at this actual closure and we look at the time interval since 1970, although the seconds are updating every 1 second, this closure is actually triggering every like millisecond. So that's really cool, but really this closure is going to then be triggering a lot more than we need it to trigger. If we were updating and animating at a millisecond level, this is what we would want. But if we're only animating based on these seconds, then we actually don't need to trigger this. We don't need this closure going crazy every millisecond. And so for this example, if we're actually only animating every second, we really only need this trigger every second. So cool thing about the timeline view is we can customize how often that closure is going to trigger based on the minimum interval here. So I'm going to add the minimum interval of every 1 second, and paused, I'll just keep false for now. So not paused. We can see here the time interval is now triggering only every 1 second and not every millisecond. So the animation on the screen at this level looks the same, but this is probably going to be more performant because this closure triggers every second rather than every millisecond. The next thing I want to talk about is that this is cool that the animation is based on the actual real-time seconds, But I find, at least in my apps, most of the time when I'm doing some sort of cool animation like this, I want to do it based on the time that this has been on the screen. So rather than doing it based on the minute being less than 10 seconds, I really want to do it based on less than 10 seconds of being on the screen. So if it appears and then 10 seconds later, I want to do something else, and then 20 seconds later, I want to do something else. So one way we could do that is create some sort of @state private var, and we'll call it start time of type date, and we'll set it equal to now. So when we create this view, we will set the start time to the time that the view was first created. We'll hold the state of that time. And then every time this closure executes, instead of getting the seconds of the current time, we'll get the seconds since the start time. So I'm going to do that real quick. Let's just comment this out. Let's say let seconds equals, we'll call the context.date. So that's the current time, and we'll do .time interval since the start. So let's put this on the screen here. And we can see here now this last text 5, 6, 7, 8 is the time since it's been on the screen. For me, at least, this is much more relevant to work with, because a lot of times I do an animation where it's like after second 1, then do something, after second 3, 5, 10, and now we can get pixel perfect with animations like that as well. And this is awesome. There's a couple final things that I want to wrap up here with. Firstly, we have this paused parameter, which we probably should use. So underneath the timeline view, but in the V stack, I'm going to put a quick button. And in the button, we're going to put a play pause button. So up here at the top, let's create an @state private var, let's say pause animation of type bool. Let's set it equal to maybe false for now. So in the title of the button, let's just put if pause animation is true, let's put play. Otherwise, let's put pause. And in here, we'll just call pause animation.toggle. We're going to pass the pause animation into here, and it's going to do exactly what you expected it to do. It's going to play or pause the actual animation. So I'm going to restart my screen real quick, and we're going to press play, and right now it is playing, but I'm going to pause it. You'll notice when I pause it, all of these times have stopped updating. So this closure basically stops executing when it is paused. So this is really cool if we want to do some sort of intricate animation where we literally pause the animation midway through it or something like that. One thing I'll note, obviously right now our current setup is based on the start time. So even though we pause this, when I continue it, the seconds will still be based on that start time. So it's going to jump to, I don't know, 100 seconds right now. 40 seconds. All right, I overestimated a little bit. But you could set this up in a way that it's not maybe based on the start time, it's based on some other indicator in your app. So really cool that we can play and pause this. All right, and the last thing I'll leave you guys with is that in addition to getting the date from the context, we can also get something called the cadence. So for example, I can say if context.cadence is equal to, and the cadence is either going to be live, minutes, or seconds. So this means that the view is updating approximately once per second, once per minute, or continuously. So if the cadence is live, I'm just going to put a text on the screen that says cadence live. I'll say else if context.cadence is equal to minutes, text, cadence, minutes, else if context cadence is equal to dot seconds, text cadence is second. I'm going to be totally honest with you guys here. This is a little confusing to me. I don't fully understand how this works because right now we are updating every second and yet the cadence is minutes. So if anybody does understand this, feel free to leave a comment below. Help somebody else out, help me out. But I just wanted to show you guys that that is there because for some reason maybe that will help you out if you're changing this animation. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up here. Again, this timeline view is a little tricky to use the first time, but it's really cool because now we can do animations based on basically on time, on the timeline view. So after 1 second, after 2 seconds, we can do custom animations. Couple things just to remember, we can pause the animation if we need to. We can pause the actual updating of this closure. So if you get to a certain point, you could then pause it, which would be really cool. Maybe you have like a really long and dramatic animation that gets paused when the user does some action. And we can change the interval of this. So maybe we want it to trigger every 0.1 seconds or 0.001 seconds. It'll trigger really, really rapidly, and we can get really micro animations going. You can also change this to something like every minute, and it literally is going to trigger just once per minute. So this could be something cool if you wanted to maybe like actually a minute clock onto your screen, or every minute you change something slowly in the background. You could do something like that. And then while you're doing this, remember that we do need to still add the animation modifier, and then the animation is going to have its own time. So remember that the .animation, like ease in out, we can change the duration of the animation. So just because this is triggering every 1 second or every millisecond, it doesn't mean the animation is going to take the same speed. The animation could be a different speed based on however you put it here. But I like this new .bouncy animation, which I think I'm going to be using a lot in my apps. All right, so that is it for this video. I'm still pretty new to TimelineView as well, so if there's anything I missed, feel free to comment it below. I didn't do a more complex example because this is kind of the extent of what I've used it for so far. Basically just animating after like 1, 5, 10 seconds. Obviously not just a rectangle, something better than that. But this is, I think, the core use case of the TimelineView, at least that I've used it so far. How to know when to use TimelineView? I would basically say if you're trying to do some basic animation in SwiftUI, do just a simple @state, animate, right, bool, false. The same way we've been doing animation in all of the playlists and all of my videos, like a simple SwiftUI animation, that should still be our default animation. That's how we should be handling most animations in our app. And then there are cases where you're trying to do a really complex thing. So if you end up having like multiple parts to the animation, like animate 2, 3, 4, and it's like this dramatic animation that you're trying to add, that's probably a good indicator of when you should try using a TimelineView. So simple animations, just use a Boolean, don't use TimelineView. More complex ones, or ones that need to update every second, every minute, based on some sort of cadence, use the TimelineView. That's it for me, guys. Thank you for watching. As always, I'm Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and then go grab a coffee because the next couple of videos are going to get pretty freaking insane. I hope you guys are ready.